Welcome to my Bake Escape. It's officially fall and I am so excited. I've been baking lots of great recipes I can't wait to share with you, but this video is a little different. This week I am reviewing Krusteaz Pumpkin Spice Quick Bread Mix. For the full recipe, visit mybakeescape.com. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you know when I release new content. You can also follow me on Instagram and Pinterest at mybakeescape. I have seen this box of pumpkin spice mix at my local Costco for years. This year, I finally decided to grab one and give it a try. I made a double batch a few weeks ago and was impressed with the quality that I decided to do a review for you. You can use this mix to make pancakes and cookies, but for this video, I made a pumpkin spice loaf. The box comes with 4 packages of the dry mixture and 4 packages of the pecans. Unfortunately, I used all of the pecans last time I made this. The pecans they give you are not nearly enough, so I add about another cup of pecans for this recipe. I like to toast the pecans for this recipe, so to toast pecans, you just need to add about a cup to a baking sheet and bake them for about 8 to 10 minutes in a 350-degree Fahrenheit oven. Around 6 minutes, I like to give the pan a little shake just to kind of toss the nuts around a little bit and make sure that they evenly bake. They can burn pretty quickly, so you just want to keep an eye on them and bake them until you start to smell that toasty, nutty aroma, and then you can remove them from the oven and let them cool, and then you can use them in any recipe. So once the pecans have cooled, I went ahead and chopped them up into smaller pieces. I used about half a cup of pecans for the inside of the mix, so like to add to the loaf itself, and then I used these toasted pecans to sprinkle on top after I iced the loaf. I like to always decorate whatever I bake. If it has nuts or chocolate or lemon, I always like to add it to the outside so that whoever is eating it knows that there are nuts inside of the pastry or loaf. So for the outside, I used toasted pecans, and for the inside of the loaf to actually bake inside, I used some raw pecans that I chopped up. And I used about a half a cup of raw pecans for the inside of the loaf. The kit comes with this dry mixture, but you will also need a few other ingredients. You'll need some vegetable oil, water, and 2 eggs. This mixture smells really delicious. You can smell the spices, and you can even see flakes of orange bits of what I'm guessing is the pumpkin. I think it's dehydrated, but it smells really good. So to this mixture, I add the water, followed by the oil. For this recipe, I used vegetable oil. I added the chopped pecans, and then I added the 2 eggs. I always like to crack eggs in a separate container. Sometimes when you add them straight into your mixture, if you drop a shell, it's really hard to find where that shell is beneath all those pecans in the oil. So I always like to crack them in a separate container and then add them where they need to go after I ensure there are no broken shells. Then I give this a quick mix. You can definitely mix this by hand. I just had my hand mixer here that I just used to mix for a few seconds. You want to mix until everything is combined and it looks like all of that dry mixture is absorbed into the wet mixture. For this recipe, I am using a 9x5 loaf pan that I liberally spray with some non-stick cooking spray. I also use this large spatula just to give it a mix, make sure I have everything mixed in evenly. There's no dry bits at the bottom. This looks so delicious. All those pecans in there, it's going to be amazing. So I poured the batter into the greased 9x5 loaf pan. At this point, my oven is already preheated at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. I like to spread this out evenly, that way the loaf bakes evenly in the oven, and this is going to bake for about 50 to 55 minutes. Around the 45-minute mark, I started checking for doneness. You just want to let this bake until the center has puffed up and it's set. And if you wanted to, you can insert a skewer or toothpick, and as long as a little bit of crumb comes out, you know it's done. So once it's done baking, I remove it from the oven and I let it sit on this cooling rack for about 10 minutes. Then I carefully, using a butter knife, just release the edges of the loaf from the pan. The pan is still warm here, so I carefully transferred this to a cooling rack and then quickly turned it over. And there you have it. It turned out beautiful. It looks delicious. It smells amazing, but it's going to get even better because I'm going to add a delicious glaze. So for the glaze, you're going to need powdered sugar along with this pumpkin spiced syrup. I made this last week. For the recipe, click the link here and you'll see how I make this delicious pumpkin spice syrup. You can use in coffees and in recipes like I'm going to show you now. Again, for the full recipes, visit mybakeescape.com. So I went ahead and mixed this powdered sugar up just a little bit, and then I added, this is 2 tablespoons of this pumpkin spice syrup. As I started to mix this together, I realized that was not nearly enough liquid. So when you are making a glaze or an icing like this, you don't want to add too much liquid all at once because then it'll be really watery. So I like to add the liquid a little bit at a time, and I added about 6 tablespoons of this pumpkin spice syrup total. And so I just added probably about 2 tablespoons at a time until I reached the consistency that I wanted. For this, I wanted a nice drizzle consistency. So I just kept mixing and adding until I achieved that consistency. Ideally, you would want to let this loaf cool for about an hour. I was racing against the sun because I like to use natural light for my videos. So I didn't let it cool down completely. It had been cooling for about 30 minutes. Time I ice something, I like to lay some parchment down to catch the drips. So that's my recommendation. It really helps when it's time to clean up. So this loaf is still a little bit warm, but I went ahead and added the icing to the top, just drizzling it on top, making sure that I am adding it as evenly as possible. I want it to cover the entire top of the loaf and the side as evenly as I can. Now, if this loaf was cooler, it wouldn't have dripped off so quickly, but actually there was just enough glaze left that it was still delicious. But my recommendation is to let your loaf cool for at least an hour before adding the glaze. Now again, because I was racing the sun, I decided to cut this and not let it sit for another 45 minutes to an hour. You do want to let this glaze sit, but before that, don't do as I do. I totally missed a step of adding the pecans. So while the glaze is still warm, you want to sprinkle those chopped toasted pecans to the top, and then let the loaf rest for about 45 minutes to an hour so the icing is set and it won't make such a mess when you eat it. Aside from the fact that I forgot to sprinkle those pecans on the loaf, I was very happy with the way that this loaf turned out. It is very moist. The spice is perfect. The pumpkin comes through, and that pumpkin spice glaze is just literally the icing on the cake. It makes this loaf even more delicious. I hope that you enjoyed this review. If you see this boxed mix at your local Costco or at your grocery store, I recommend that you pick it up and give it a try. It's super easy to make. It comes together really fast, and you get a delicious pumpkin spice loaf. Now, the icing is optional. You don't have to add it. I always just like to add a little bit of my own touch to things, and so I thought that the icing was a perfect combination with that loaf. I hope you enjoyed my review of the Krusteaz pumpkin spice quick bread mix. Thank you so much for watching, and have a sweet day. I just spilled my syrup all over. Oh my god, I forgot to put the pecan.